The Sand Empire, the Garamantes and the Den are buried under the Sahara. Paleoclimate researchers found, when they analysed sediment cores, fossil pollen, and ancient lakebed deposits from across the Sahara, evidence of a period between approximately 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, known as the African Humid Period, or the Green Sahara, during which the largest desert on Earth was a landscape of lakes, rivers, grasslands, and forest, home to hippos, crocodiles, elephants, and human populations numbering in the millions. The Sahara today covers approximately 9 million square kilometers across North Africa, an area roughly the size of the contiguous United States. Annual rainfall across most of its interior is less than 25 millimeters. Temperatures routinely exceed 50 degrees Celsius at the surface. It appears to be a place where large-scale human civilization is impossible. 10,000 years ago, none of that was true. The summer monsoon rains that now stop at the southern edge of the Sahara penetrated thousands of kilometers further north, driven by changes in Earth's orbital parameters that altered solar energy reaching the northern hemisphere. Lakes filled the basins. Rivers ran through what are now dry wadis. The region, now covered by the Libyan desert, supported permanent human settlements, agriculture, and animal husbandry. The rock art at Tassili Najer in southern Algeria, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, records this world in extraordinary detail. Elephants, giraffes, hippopotamuses, cattle herds, human figures swimming, and scenes of daily life created by people who lived in a Sahara that would be unrecognizable today. The question the DNA evidence is now beginning to answer is, what happened to those people when the green world ended? Archaeological evidence found at the site of ancient Garama, the capital of the Garamantian civilization, located in the Fezzan region of present-day Libya, documents a state-level society that flourished in the Central Sahara from approximately 500 BCE to 700 CE, organized its economy around a remarkable water engineering system, and maintained commercial and military relationships with the Roman Empire that are recorded in both Roman texts and Garamantian material culture. The Garamantes are mentioned in the writings of Herodotus, who describes them as a great people of the Libyan interior who hunt cave-dwelling Ethiopians from 4-horse chariots. Roman sources document military conflicts. The general Cornelius Balbus received a triumph in Rome in 19 BCE for victories against the Garamantes, and eventually a form of client-state relationship. The Roman perspective consistently frames the Garamantes as desert raiders, a characterization that the archaeological evidence significantly complicates. Excavations at Garama and at surrounding sites, conducted primarily by British archaeologists led by David Mattingly of the University of Leicester, beginning in the 1990s and continuing into the 2000s under the project known as the Desert Migrations and Garamantian Research Programs, revealed a densely settled landscape of fortified towns, irrigated farmland, and a network of trade routes connecting the sub-Saharan African interior to the Mediterranean coast. The city of Garama itself was surrounded by agricultural land producing grapes, barley, wheat, and date palms, crops that require reliable water in a region that receives almost no rainfall. The water came from a system of engineering that Mattingly's team described as one of the most impressive hydrological achievements of the ancient world. Genetic analysis found, when researchers examined ancient DNA from skeletal remains recovered from Garamantian burial sites, profiles that illuminate both who the Garamantes were biologically and how they related to the other populations of ancient North Africa. Results that place this desert civilization firmly within the genetic landscape of the region, while documenting specific adaptations to their extreme environment. The Gantian skeletal sample available for genetic analysis is limited by the desert preservation environment. Extreme heat and aridity are damaging to DNA over millennia, and not all burial contexts have yielded usable genetic material. The samples that have been analysed show ancestry patterns consistent with the ancient African population that contributed to the broader Berber and Amazigh genetic heritage, with some admixture from sub-Saharan African populations, the latter consistent with the documented role of the Garamantes as intermediaries in the trans-Saharan slave and trade networks. The mitochondrial haplogroups identified in Garamantian remains include lineages, particularly haplogroup U6, and several sub-Saharan African haplogroups, that document both the deep North African ancestry of the population and the genetic contribution of people from further south who became part of the Garamantian community through the mechanisms of trade, migration, and enslavement that the archaeological record documents. Comparative analysis linking the Garamantian genetic profile to present-day populations in the region shows the strongest affinities with Tuareg and Berber communities, the groups whose languages, cultures, and genetic heritage represent the most direct continuity with the pre-Arab North African population that included the Garamantes. Physical evidence found in the burial tumuli, stone-covered mounds, that dot the landscape and other Garam and other Garaundian sites, has produced skeletal material that documents the lives, health, and cultural practices of the people who built and maintained this desert civilization across 12 centuries of continuous occupation. Among the most significant individual finds from the Saharan archaeological record is the mummy known as Wan Muhujiag, recovered in 1958 from a rock shelter in the Akakis Mountains of Libya and dated to approximately 5,500 years ago. The body of a young child, preserved by desiccating desert conditions, showed evidence of intentional mummification, removal of internal organs and their replacement with grass packing, in a procedure that predates the earliest known Egyptian mummification by several centuries. DNA analysis confirmed sub-Saharan African ancestry, documenting the genetic diversity of the Central Saharan population during the late Green Sahara period. Garamantian burial practices documented at multiple sites include the interment of the dead with personal ornaments, beads made from ostrich eggshell, carnelian, and glass, some identifiable as Roman in origin, and occasionally with pottery, metal tools, and objects reflecting individual occupational identities. Several skeletons show evidence of deliberate tattooing, inferred from pigment residues near the skin surface, a practice interpreted as carrying meaning related to group identity or spiritual protection. The combination of imported goods, local ornaments, and bodily marking speaks to a population engaged with a wide world while maintaining a distinct cultural identity. Engineering evidence found at Garamantian sites across the Fezzan region of Libya documents a water management system, the Fogara, that allowed a population of hundreds of thousands to sustain urban life and intensive agriculture in an environment receiving essentially no surface rainfall, through the exploitation of deep underground water reserves by a network of tunnels and vertical shafts that ranks among the most ambitious hydraulic engineering projects of the ancient world. The Fogara worked by tapping fossil water stored in aquifers beneath the desert's surface, water accumulated during wetter periods of the Pleistocene. The Garamantes dug vertical shafts, some reaching 30 meters in depth, at regular intervals along underground channels. The channels, some stretching several kilometers, were lined with stone and packed clay to minimize seepage losses. David Mattingly's surveys identified more than 1,500 kilometers of Fogara tunnels across the Fezzan, a construction investment of staggering magnitude, requiring sustained, coordinated labor across generations. Skeletal analysis of individuals buried near Fogara construction sites shows the physical markers of heavy underground labor: spinal compression, shoulder joint wear, and hand pathologies consistent with digging in confined spaces. The system's fundamental limitation was the non-renewable nature of its water source. Fossil aquifers do not recharge on human timescales. As the Garamantes extracted water faster than geological processes could replace it, the water table dropped, the channels ran dry, and the agricultural system that sustained their cities collapsed. A lesson in resource management whose modern parallels are impossible to ignore. Material culture evidence found at Garamantian sites and in Roman sources documents the role of the Garamantes as the dominant intermediaries in the trans-Saharan trade network that connected the Mediterranean world to sub-Saharan Africa during the late Roman period. A commercial role that made their desert heartland one of the most economically significant transit zones of the ancient world. Roman coins, glassware, ceramic lamps, and metal objects have been recovered from Garamantian burial and occupation contexts across the Fezzan, documenting regular commercial exchange with the Roman provinces to the north. In return, the Garamantes supplied commodities that Roman markets demanded: enslaved people, wild animals for the arena, ivory, gold, and, most prosaically but perhaps most valuably, salt, which was produced from desert deposits and was essential for food preservation across the ancient world. The introduction of the domesticated dromedary camel to North Africa, sometime around the turn of the Common Era, transformed the economics of Saharan trade by making long-distance desert crossings vastly more logistically manageable than they had been with horses or donkeys. DNA analysis of ancient camel remains from North African sites has helped researchers track the spread of camel herding across the region and its relationship to the intensification of trans-Saharan commerce during the Garamantian peak period. The genetic legacy of the trans-Saharan trade routes is visible in the DNA of modern North African populations as a gradient of sub-Saharan African ancestry that increases with proximity to the traditional trade route termini. A biological record of the centuries during which people, as well as goods, moved along these desert highways. Archaeological evidence found at the site of Nabta Playa in the Egyptian Sahara, a dry lakebed in the Nubian desert, approximately 100 kilometers west of Abu Simbel, documents a complex of stone circles, alignments, and cattle burials that constitutes the oldest known astronomically significant stone monument in the world, predating Stonehenge by at least 1,000 years. Nabta Playa was discovered by a team led by Fred Wendorf of Southern Methodist University in the 1970s and has been excavated intermittently since then. The main stone circle, dated to approximately 6,000 years ago, consists of upright stones arranged in a roughly circular pattern, with specific alignments toward the rising sun at the summer solstice, the moment in the year when the monsoon rains that watered the Green Sahara would have been at their most reliable. The alignment appears to have been deliberately constructed to mark this calendrically significant date. Burial pits at Nabta Playa contain the remains of cattle interred in a manner that parallels the burial of human individuals, individually placed, sometimes in stone-lined pits, with apparent care and ritual attention. The cattle cult documented at Nabta Playa and at other Saharan sites of the same period is understood as reflecting the central economic and symbolic importance of cattle herding to the Green Sahara's pastoral communities. Genetic analysis of cattle bones from Saharan archaeological sites has contributed to the broader reconstruction of African cattle domestication history, establishing that African cattle were domesticated independently from Near Eastern cattle, and that the pastoral economies of the Sahara and the Nile Valley developed in close interaction over millennia. Population genetic and archaeological evidence found across the Saharan and sub-Saharan African record documents the dispersal of the Green Sahara's population during the period of desertification, a demographic movement that the DNA evidence now allows researchers to trace into the genetic heritage of multiple modern African populations. The desertification of the Sahara did not happen overnight, and the human response was correspondingly gradual. As rainfall diminished over centuries, pastoral communities moved with their herds toward the remaining water sources: the Nile Valley, Lake Chad, the Niger River bend, and the coastal margins of North Africa. The genetic signatures of green Sahara populations appear in the ancestry of all these populations, diluted by subsequent admixture, but detectable in specific haplogroup distributions and ancestry proportions. Studies comparing ancient Saharan DNA with modern populations in the Lake Chad Basin, the Nile Valley, and the West African Sahel have confirmed this southward and eastward genetic movement, tracing it specifically to the period of desertification between 5,000 and 3,000 years ago. For the Garamantes specifically, the final abandonment of their cities in the period between the 5th and 7th centuries CE, coinciding with the Arab conquest of North Africa and the final exhaustion of their Sahara water supplies, scattered their population into the surrounding desert regions. The Tuareg of the Central Sahara and the Sahel, and the Berber-speaking communities of the Libyan interior, carry genetic ancestry that ancient DNA analysis links to the Garamantian population. The Garamantian language, a form of ancient Berber, left traces in the Tifinagh script that the Tuareg still use today. Remote sensing technology applied to the Saharan landscape over the past 3 decades has produced a revolution in the understanding of the region's archaeological heritage, revealing a density and complexity of ancient occupation that no ground survey of the actual desert surface could have detected, and providing a scientific foundation for DNA research by identifying new sites where biological material may be preserved. Synthetic aperture radar imaging, which can penetrate dry sand to depths of several meters and map subsurface features, was applied to the Eastern Sahara by NASA researchers in the early 1980s. The results showed ancient river channels, buried under meters of sand, that had carried water across what is now hyper-arid desert during the wetter periods of the Pleistocene and Holocene. The ancient drainage systems mapped by radar correspond closely to the locations of known archaeological sites from the Green Sahara period, confirming that human settlement followed water availability. LiDAR surveys of accessible Garamantian sites have documented the spatial organization of the fortified towns, known as Ksur in the regional Arabic tradition, that formed the settlement network of the Fezzan. The survey data has identified previously unrecorded structures, including what appear to be agricultural terracing systems and water distribution infrastructure extending beyond the Fagara channels themselves. Libyan desert glass, a natural silica glass found in the Egyptian Western Desert, was formed approximately 28 million years ago by an impact or airburst event of cosmic origin. A piece of this glass was found carved into a scarab in the pectoral of Tutankhamun. Its presence in a royal Egyptian burial is evidence of long-distance exchange networks across the Eastern Sahara that predated the Garamantian period. Scientific synthesis found across the paleoclimate, archaeological, and genetic literature on Saharan civilizations presents a picture of a region whose apparent emptiness conceals one of the richest chapters in the human story. A chapter that the combination of radar, DNA, and systematic excavation is now recovering from beneath the sand. The African humid period produced populations of millions across a landscape now considered uninhabitable. Those populations developed herding economies, astronomical knowledge, water management techniques, and artistic traditions that influenced the civilizations of the Nile Valley and the Mediterranean, and whose DNA flows through the genetic heritage of populations across North and West Africa. The Garamantes represent the last and most sophisticated expression of Saharan civilization, sustaining urban life through engineering that lasted over 1,000 years before its own resource base gave out. The DNA evidence has played a specific role. It has connected the ancient populations to living ones, established the genetic reality of trans-Saharan connections, and documented the biological diversity of a civilization that Roman sources described as a single ethnic group, but whose skeletal DNA shows was a complex, multi-ethnic society shaped by the trade networks it dominated. Surveys have examined perhaps 10% of the known archaeological potential of the Saharan region. The desert preserves material under its surface with extraordinary fidelity. Wood, leather, textiles, seeds, and bone can survive thousands of years in the right conditions, and the dry, stable burial environment of the Saharan interior is among the best preservation contexts on Earth. What remains to be found is far larger than what has been found.